My name's John McVea. I was Detective Chief Superintendent in charge of the PSNI's Serious Crime Branch. I remember getting the call in the middle of the night. One of those calls you always dread receiving, that somebody had been stabbed fatally in Belfast.
Tributes have been paid to boxer Eamonn Magee Jr, who was murdered on the outskirts of West Belfast this morning.
Heartbreaking, absolutely heartbreaking. Who wants to hear that their brother's been stabbed?
People from right across the community came out in force just to show their support that I suppose boxing had lost one of their own. He was absolutely going to go to the top.
Somebody had knifed him. How did this happen? I just couldn't understand. Because Eamonn was such a good child, he was never angry in his life.
It's so important that we put our hands on the suspect early.
We knew the murder had just happened. We have 24 hours to conduct the investigation.
One of the phrases you hear a lot is the dogs in the street know who did it.
Had we arrested the wrong person? And our hearts sank.
I'm Mary Magee, and I'm the mother of Eamonn.
On the 30th of May, 2015, Eamonn Magee Jr was found stabbed to death on a street corner in West Belfast.
Your kids aren't supposed to go in front of you. You're not supposed to carry your son's coffin, you know. It's just such a loss. Yes. You're helpless because you wanted to go and help your wee son. Yeah. It's just not the way things should be.
He just had goals and he knew how to get them and how to go for them, and very headstrong person.
Eamonn had two older siblings, Francis and Anya. He was studying engineering while working as a personal trainer. His father was the champion boxer Eamonn Sr, who he had followed into the ring.
He had his boxing career on the go. He had his VPT business on the go. And then his first year finished engineering. 22 and everything to live for.
I was lying in bed with my oldest wee boy, Cormac, but I heard a knock at the door and I was like, I got Eamonn just messing about. But then I didn't see no car and I heard no doors. Something in my head just says, ring Eamonn's phone. The partner who he was with at the time, Courtney Ward, answered and was like, he's dead, he's dead. And I was shouting and screaming, what do you mean, he's dead, he's dead? She was just crying and sobbing, and by that stage then I had to run upstairs. And I told my mummy, get to the hospital, quick, quick, get down to the hospital.
When I went into the hospital, I was put into a room, 2 doctors were brought into me, and just said, we tried for ages there and couldn't get him. And I went, who are you talking about? They went, your son, Eamonn Magee. And I went, no, not my son, not my son. I just walked around going, no, 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 don't want to hear this. And he went, it's your son, Eamonn.
She rang me. It's not even a blur. It's like, you don't even know how to put it into words. It was just so heartbreaking. I knew he was gone, and she just wouldn't admit it to me over the phone. Eamonn's friend and his friend's father came and got me. Got to the hospital, and when I went in, the police were standing behind my mummy and they just looked at me and went like this. And I just dropped him and collapsed to the floor.
The first thing I need is make sure I've got the right resources going to the scene with me. So whilst I ring the Major Crime Forensic Advisor, they in turn ring photography, mappers, the crime scene investigators who are going to take samples and start to get everybody heading.
My name's Darren McCartney, and I'm a Detective Chief Inspector in a PSNI Crime Operations Department. Early on the Saturday of the 30th of May, 2015, I was on a weekend off and I was hoping to head off with my wife and children, but my senior investigator called, John, and said, Darren, there's a murder in Lisburn, and that's a part and parcel of the role you had. You just tend to drop everything and go.
The initial report into the police, we knew the murder had just happened. That started the clock for me.
It was in the early hours of Saturday morning that he was stabbed here in Summerhill Park in Twinbrook.
This is a period of time which is critical for detectives to maximise the opportunity, retrieve and gather evidence. This whole area was sealed off. We could see very clearly there was a car parked here just on the corner, and there was a trail of blood that led from the gate all the way down to the road. There was no obvious immediate motive. There were no witnesses that were immediately identified at the scene. No CCTV, there was no sign of a murder weapon. So I was alarmed very early. There's nothing really here to be going on. The time is ticking by, and I know in cases like this that minutes and hours matter.
It's so important that we put our hands on the suspect early. Does the suspect provide a risk to the greater public or themselves? Are they carrying any forensic evidence on them that we need to obtain before they get rid of it or destroy it? And thirdly, do they have any weapons that we need to take off the street?
To John and Darren, Eamonn's killing appeared to be a random knife attack.
I was unaware in the early hours of this whether I was dealing with one assailant, two, or whether this was a gang of people that had attacked Eamonn.
So how did this happen? I just couldn't understand. Because Eamonn was such a good child, he was never angry in his life, never fought in his life. You know, nobody was at my door or anything. I couldn't understand this. I couldn't understand, like, somebody had knifed him. What did he get into a fight? Was there a fight? Where was he? I just, couldn't comprehend it.
Martin Rogan was Eamonn Jr.'s boxing coach and a close family friend.
To be around such a lovely bunch of people, his mother, Mary, Anya and Francis, you know, I know them all very, very closely, and it just hurts me to think the pain and suffering, I'm ready to break myself here, the pain and suffering that they're going through is terrible.
I got a text message, so at about 6 in the morning. Eamonn Magee's, he's been killed. What? In my head, I wasn't thinking of young Eamonn. I was thinking of senior. It was only until, like, I think it was 8 o'clock next morning, it was Eamonn Jr. I went, what? I couldn't take it in that it was young Eamonn, because it was this young, gentle soul, this humble young man gone. And wanting to lift the phone and ring, and then I didn't want to do it, to have to retell the story of why their amazing son was gone. I was trying my best not to see this, the visions in my head, seeing young Eamonn.
Detectives now wondered who could be responsible for Eamonn's murder. In Northern Ireland, every crime has to be considered in the context of sectarianism.
Obviously, in Northern Ireland and the historical background, first thing everybody jumps to paramilitarism. However, this was a knife crime. It's very, very, very rarely that paramilitarism would be involved in knife crimes.
Whoever was responsible, the team faced conducting their investigation in precarious circumstances. The peace process was under strain, following the killing of a prominent Republican.
Jock Davison had been murdered earlier in the month, so tensions were high, and there had been quite a large number of attempted terrorist attacks on police.
The situation was made worse by a long-standing distrust of policing in the West Belfast community where Eamonn was murdered.
We were Twinbrook, would have verged on the border between Belfast and Lisburn, but fell within Lisburn's area. And that would have been probably in a state that where police probably wouldn't have been as well received as others. Sort of challenging environment for police to work in.
Twinbrook in West Belfast, it's a very large urban working class community, overwhelmingly nationalist and Republican. We had just under 14 years of peace in terms of the Good Friday Agreement. Politics hadn't really stabilised itself. Issues around flags, parades, bonfires. Twinbrook, dominated by Sinn Féin as a political party. That party didn't sign up to policing until 2007, so that literally was only 8 years of acceptance of the police and the criminal justice system in that area. In any other society, that relationship was already there, but in the case of Twinbrook, that's what makes things more difficult and more convoluted in terms of investigations.
Historically, there's been distrust of policing in Twinbrook and that general West Belfast area. We need community involvement, we need community assistance, we need the witnesses. A young man from our own community had been killed, and we wanted to get a resolution for that, for them, for his family.
Courtney, Eamonn's partner at the time, was present at the scene, and that gives us an opportunity for a very early account from Courtney to understand why was Eamonn out in the street, what happened, what were they doing that night. Courtney had described quite an ordinary evening where they'd ordered pizza. In the house in question, there was two ways into it, so it was quite often or quite normal for delivery people to be mixed up and confused with the best way in. And Eamonn had gone out in order to see where the delivery driver was. We entered the crime scene to do the assessment. We followed a trail of blood. We had the house in question secured as a crime scene, the back garden. And it was upon entering the back garden that we noticed some areas of blood on the gate and also just on the grass area. So that absolutely changed things for me, because this attack seemed to have occurred in the back garden. So the early hypothesis that had been formed was maybe no longer fitting, that we weren't looking at a stranger attack, an altercation that had taken place out on the street. This was maybe something much more sinister, much more premeditated. We were looking at somebody that had deliberately sought out Eamonn Magee.
He did have a terrible death. And he was such a happy-go-lucky person, we couldn't put the story together that night, what had happened or why it had happened. He was stabbed 5 times, so there was blood coming out of him everywhere. And the doctors were working with him. The blood was in his ears, and his hair was soaked with blood. His hair was all hard. And me and Anya were going, my God, he would hate to be lying there like that, you know. Everybody looking at him.
In Twinbrook, police sealed off the crime scene and began a murder investigation. Their presence immediately drew the attention of local community leaders.
I was asked to go down to the outer cordon because a Sinn Féin councillor had asked to speak to the senior investigating officer to understand what had taken place. I was very courteous, professional, gave them a loose briefing that there had been a stabbing. After that exchange, I walked back up to the crime scene to continue the work there. And when I got back there, I spoke to my detective inspector. We're nowhere here with this. The community have the answer here. I can't rely on the traditional media appeal. We need something faster. We need this now.
One of the phrases you hear a lot is the dogs in the street know who did it. And the reality is the public look to their political representatives for guidance and for support and for confidence to engage with the police.
So I walked back down again and asked to see the councillor. And I said, look, I'll just be honest with you, and I'm going to ask for help. It was difficult because detectives, we keep our investigation tight, secure, don't talk about it. And this was probably one of the first times I had taken somebody into, I suppose, the confidence.
If John was right, the community would quickly reveal vital evidence. If he was wrong, the entire investigation could be undermined. He hoped to rely on the respect in which Eamonn was held by the community.
Young Eamonn was very dedicated. Sport, eating, fitness. If he wasn't training in the ring, he was away doing something else, you know. So I would say maybe about 11, the interest started to grow. It was like a family sport. I think it put a bit of a regime into him. A wee bit of independence to start to look after himself as well. He was just a real wee man, you know, loved his style, and he was very charismatic.
Word about Eamonn's death spread quickly around Belfast's closely knit boxing community, uniting the group in grief.
Boxing in Belfast especially, it's in the DNA of the city. We always say there's nearly a boxing club at the corner of every street, especially in the west and north of the city. It draws people in from the four corners of a city. It's nearly easier to divide than unite. Politics has always been kept out of boxing. You would have clubs from different sections of the community would work very well together. It's nearly a community within itself. It's produced so many great champions over the years. It helps take kids maybe away from different antisocial activities. It teaches them kind of discipline and respect and help our communities kind of grow. A couple of nights before the funeral was a vigil, and some local politicians, members of the boxing community, just members of the community in general, came up, and the mood out of it was the saddest thing I'd ever attended.
We had all the support that we wanted. The vigil and everything was amazing that was held on the Tuesday night. It was absolutely unreal. Hundreds and hundreds of people showed up.
I remember the chapel at St. Joseph's in Hannatown was absolutely packed out. It was standing room only, outside and inside. People from right across the community, right across Belfast, the boxing community in particular, came out in force just to show their support that I suppose boxing had lost one of their own.
This young man, with such a bright and promising future, should be taken from us in such a cruel manner.
This was a young, promising boxer that had been murdered. It only takes a tweet from somebody like Carl Frampton and Paddy Barnes and others really to catch the media attention, and this had gone bigger than Northern Ireland and was attracting media internationally. It was also cranking up the profile of the murder, and the focus was very much on the investigation and how we were going to solve this murder.
There was no obvious reason for Eamonn's murder. He had no criminal background and was unknown to the police. But his partner, Courtney, revealed a potential lead.
Courtney told us about her husband, who she was estranged with and had been estranged from for many months now. On the basis of some of the things she said, that caused me concern. She had told her ex-husband that she was now with somebody else and that she no longer loved him. And that was on the day before the murder, so this was on the Friday, and the murder took place in the early hours of Saturday morning. So we had the start of something that I would describe as a motive. It wasn't much to go on, I have to say. If you have a motive, then you need to look at, is there an opportunity? The relationship started when Courtney and her family went to Turkey on a family holiday. She met Oren. He worked in a hotel. That then developed into a relationship. They spent some years in Turkey. They eventually got married, and he came to Northern Ireland around 2012.
They had 3 children. Their relationship had broken down, although he did have daily contact with the children. But beyond that, we knew very little about him.
We don't know where he is. We don't know where he works. If he works, we know absolutely nothing.
Detective McVea needed to track down Orhan Koka, and quickly. He once more turned to the community leaders for their help.
I named him to the councillor.
Police sometimes can be very reluctant to share information. So the fact that information is being shared is the start of a relationship. You build a relationship, you build a partnership. You build a partnership, you build good outcomes.
Within 2 hours, I was told where Eamonn Magee slept and where he worked.
We discovered that he'd been living in a local bar. He was working there, and the owner had allowed him to reside on the premises at night time. We also knew that the suspect worked during the day in a local barber's.
Just 8 hours after Eamonn was murdered, the local community had led detectives to their chief suspect. But uncovering forensic evidence to link him to the murder would be a challenge.
I had absolutely no evidence and was concerned that the scene was highly unlikely to produce anything. The murder scene was in the back garden of an address that Eamonn Magee had legitimate access to. He had been at the house that day. Any forensic evidence was going to be meaningless. Making somebody a suspect for murder and being arrested for murder is a significant decision. If you get it wrong, it has quite far-reaching consequences.
Despite the risks, the PSNI decided to go ahead with the arrest.
Around about 9 a.m, there was a decision made that we'd go and make an arrest of Magee. Detective Constable Logan was just tasked to go and conduct the arrest. She walked in, and Magee just happened to be in the barber's at the time. He had his mobile phone in his hand. I think he was a little bit nonplussed about being arrested by a woman. His reply was, "I've done nothing. Don't know why you're here."
The owner of the barbers asked him in Turkish, what is this about? What have you done? Have you done anything? Are you in trouble? And he was denying it. He showed to us maybe the first signs of who and what Eamonn Magee is. And that is somebody who has an issue with females. When we arrested Eamonn Magee at Moe's Barbers, the second clock started ticking. We have 24 hours to conduct the investigation and to complete the interviews.
We seized his mobile phone from him. Phones are really important to policing, and just so happened that when we moved to make an arrest, Magee was the phone in his hand. A, we've got the phone. B, we can attribute it to Magee. We submit that to some of our specialist teams for examination.
Things are now coming back in our favour. We've got some control. We have him, we have his phones. We start to think there's opportunities, there's potential, and we knew that we had established a crime scene at Beckett's Bar.
This was where Magee worked, and where detectives now began a forensic search.
We went straight and acted on the information that was given to us by the community. We knew from the information that he had worked there the night before, and he'd been there, most importantly, after the murder, and that created the opportunity for us to search for the murder weapon, search for clothing, and search for any trace evidence that may have been left.
Beckett's was a busy bar, which held regular functions for the community. Cancelling them could inflame local tensions. Not doing so could risk the loss of vital evidence.
So there was an option, say to the bar, sorry, don't care, everybody out, we'll let you know when we've finished with your bar. Or we can seek cooperation. We can look at where the middle ground is, what we can do to facilitate both. And I think that got us a lot of goodwill from the owner of the bar and from the staff. We were actually showing that we were concerned about his business.
Meanwhile, the community grieved the loss of a young man held in high esteem.
Young Eamonn Jr., the main man, if everybody had the frame of mind that that young man had, what he was doing feeds into other kids that they can box and they can also get degrees. It's about believing in yourself.
I thought he was absolutely fantastic. He really was. He was a proper fighter in his own right. Of course, there's going to be whispers that there's Magee's son, is he going to go all the way? But talking to people in boxing about him, they were convinced that, yeah, he absolutely would. His professional debut took place in 2014. I think everybody at ringside that night looked at each other going, whoa, we've something special here. He was absolutely going to go to the top.
I think he just wanted the Excel to be something that he wanted to be. It was sport, sport, sport. Education, education, education. How do you beat that? Me and him had many a conversation, and I think that's where our bond really came from, because I was able to understand him.
Eamonn and young Eamonn weren't even speaking. Young Eamonn didn't like the way big Eamonn carried on with drink, and there was a row, and he said, I don't want you coming to train me smelling of alcohol every day. And I think it's hard now on him, because you just meet Eamonn, he just cries all day long.
I can understand he doesn't want to be trained as that. I can understand that. I knew the situation in his relationship with his father, and I felt for him because I didn't have the greatest relationship with my father. So I was able to sort of communicate with him, and many a time me and him had a good personal, private conversations about life and, you know, forgiveness and trying to help him out. Pardon me. I was able to relate to young Eamonn because I knew how he was feeling, and I just knew that I could help young Eamonn not feel the way that I felt growing up too. Yeah.
While forensic searches continued at the bar where Coca worked, John began to piece together his movements on the night of the murder.
There was a number of bits of information that came out of our inquiries. So we knew that we could anchor the time of the murder almost to the very minute. It was confirmed that there was a period during the night that Eamonn Coca had left the premises. He had told the night watchman that he was going out to purchase some food, and that was at around 1:30, 1:45 in the morning. The night watchman wanted to make sure that he could lock up properly for the night to fulfill his duties. He had rang Eamonn Coca's mobile number within 2 minutes of when we believe the murder took place, and the purpose of that call was, where are you and when are you coming back? When he didn't get an answer from Eamonn Coca, the phone rang out. Importantly, maybe 15, 20 minutes later, he heard the shutters of the doors coming down. Eamonn Coca returned to the bar. That time, that 20 minutes, is the length of time it would take you to make your way back from the murder scene to Beckett's bar. That got me really excited as an investigator. We had Eamonn Coca's mobile phone, we had his telephone number, and here we are, somebody has put a call into his phone right at the time of the murder.
Experts now began to analyse Eamonn Coca's mobile phone. And at Beckett's bar, forensic investigators made their first breakthrough.
Our hypothesis was that he'd been involved in a frenzied knife attack. The likelihood of blood transfer from the victim to the suspect was high. He could have taken that back to the bar, to the area where he was living. So we were hoping to be able to recover something that could connect the victim and the bar, and thus Coca in the middle. Fortunately, once our search teams started conducting their searches, they very quickly found a pair of blood-stained jeans behind one of the bars.
But did they belong to Eamonn? Unless John could answer that, he would have to release Coca from custody within a matter of hours.
We made a decision to fast-track that, to make that the #1 forensic priority. We needed to know who owned the jeans. Whilst we may suspect they were Eamonn Coca's, we did not know. We commissioned the forensic laboratory to do habitual, which is identify the wearer of the jeans through DNA. Areas such as the waistband, the pockets, areas that would have common contact with skin. They worked overnight. It roughly takes 24 hours for the DNA cycle to run. We were against the clock.
I couldn't go to the house. I simply couldn't go. I wasn't being selfish, I was being thoughtful. It wouldn't have been good for his family for me to come in and break it down in front of them. It would be very unfair. In the morning of his funeral, I went down and I just walked in and put my hand on Eamonn's shoulder. And he looked around, he seen me and he went, just grabbed my arm. Eamonn Jr. had this lovely aura around him. It didn't fizz him. He knew his capabilities, he knew his strengths, and he knew where he wanted to go. A lot of kids, if they want to look up to somebody, he's a person that you can look up to. I actually looked up to him as well because he was so humble.
Experts continued their analysis of data retrieved from Orhan Koka's phone. John and his team were convinced it would prove their case against him.
We were going to get information from the phone that placed the phone at the murder scene, at the time of the murder, and that was going to be priceless. The evidential value of that was going to be significant. So we thought, here we go, we're on track. We're going to get a cell-site analysis that would place it consistent with the house. We got information back, and was to my dismay, not only did it show that the phone was not at the murder scene, it almost then went to undermine our case. It proved that the phone was miles away from the murder scene. Are we on the right path here? Have we arrested the wrong person? Because his phone is showing to be active in a different part of Belfast at the time of the murder, and our hearts sank.
John now faced another setback as the community's cooperation turned to hindrance.
Following the identification of the suspect, there were a number of attacks on properties.
One such attack was on the barber shop where Orhan Koka worked.
3 a.m. and the blue van plows into a barber shop.
We have retaliation taking place in the community, attacks taking place on Mo's barber shop.
The community have been, very helpful to me. I'm part of this community, and this is my home. And I just want to be left alone and get on with my business.
People had taken this out on the Turkish community.
Within any area, a tight-knit community, you're under pressure, regardless of whether it's loyalist or Republican or nationalist or unionist. Also, you have to remember that in areas like this, they're not necessarily used to how slow the criminal justice system can take. People want instant justice, people want instant answers.
I had so much anger inside me and so much rage. I'm glad that I had my wife sitting beside me, because I think I would have went and searched for what they'd done then. That two wrongs don't make it right.
Those actions were harming our case. We relied on Mo's barber to help our case, trying to manage community tensions.
There's that balance between allowing due process to take place, gathering the information, providing the evidence, building the case, but also trying to keep the community on side and making them aware of what you're doing.
John's message to the community was clear.
Just bear with us. We are on a path here. We are hopeful that we will get to the right place, but the racial attacks taking place is a distraction for the investigation.
As in any area where this happens, there's the the quick reaction from the community who want justice, who want retribution, and will lash out.
Detectives were worried that if chaos took hold, important evidence would be lost or destroyed. In particular, the murder weapon.
Forensic teams were continuing to search various locations in and around Twinbrook. One of the things they're looking for is the knife used to stab Eamonn Magee Jr in the early hours of yesterday morning.
We knew from speaking to members of staff at the bar that a knife had gone missing, and very, very fortunately for us, it had only recently been purchased. The bar owner was able to tell us where he got it, what it looked like.
We purchased the same knife and did a media appeal because we were thinking this knife was maybe discarded in hedgerows or in somebody's garden in the path, and whilst we had searched for it, we hadn't located it.
We know that he armed himself with a substantial size of a knife and brought it to the murder scene.
We know that Eamonn died from knife injuries. The pathologist had reported the scale of the blade that we were looking for, and again, that blade was consistent with the knife that was missing from Beckett's kitchen. We were hoping that we would recover a murder weapon, we would recover Eamonn Magee's blood from the knife, and we would ideally recover either fingerprints or DNA evidence.
As the team continued their search for the murder weapon, analysis of CCTV revealed why Coca's phone had not been present at the crime scene.
The day before, when Eoin Coca had worked and finished work at 5 o'clock, we could see that he left his phone in Moe's Barber. And we had it on CCTV that that phone was left overnight in Moe's Barber, and that took away my worry. That put us back on track.
Coca always denied the murder and claimed to have barely known Eamonn Magee. But evidence from his phone now suggested otherwise.
We were starting to get evidence that would have been very reliable because it was digital format, not really able to be disputed.
A number of apps had been deleted from the phone that morning within minutes before his arrest. Why are you deleting these apps, Facebook and so on, from your phone? Well, it's probably because you think there's something to hide there. Deeper examination of that was able to indicate that where Coca said he had occasionally seen Eamonn Magee on Facebook, well, we were able to establish it was a little bit more than occasionally. Did he know who Eamonn Magee was? Absolutely, he knew who Eamonn Magee was.
Eamonn Magee, the name, was the most searched for item on Eoin Coca's phone. We've recovered and seen some photographs of posts. It was very clear from those photographs that Courtney and Eamonn were now in a relationship.
We were able to tell how many times he'd visited his Facebook page. He had copied and kept pictures on the phone of Eamonn. He had set up a pseudonym on Facebook and used that to befriend Courtney's friends, and thus, using those friendships, we were able to track what was going on with Courtney and Eamonn Magee on a cyber basis. So he was cyber stalking.
If we hadn't got there so quickly, and Eoin Coca had managed to finish his day's shift at the barber's and leave with his telephone, we may never have got that telephone. That is a result of the golden hour actions. That is turning around the information that comes in from the community, from critical people.
Evidence from Eamonn's family suggested Coca had gone beyond cyber stalking.
Eamonn had confided in Francis, my big brother, what was going on. He was already getting death threats. To me, he didn't really seem worried. He was still up and about and loving life and enjoying himself.
Detectives were now convinced their hunch about Orhan Coca was correct. He had murdered Eamonn Magee out of jealousy.
Heartbreaking. Absolutely heartbreaking. Who wants to hear that their brother's been stabbed? over a woman. Absolutely heartbreaking.
The team delved deeper into Coca's relationship with his ex-wife and discovered disturbing evidence.
I would put Eamonn Coca down as a controller who is jealous, who has some issues with the role of females. If she was as much seen posting on Facebook with anybody, it was an immediate assumption that she was having an affair.
Members of Courtney's family came forward, and there were then suggestions of previous threats towards Courtney's father with a knife. You know, emotionally, it's a prime case of coercive control, controlling Courtney's life.
My name is Dr. Susan Lighton. I am a psychologist within the School of Psychology at Ulster University. Coercive control is a pattern of negative behaviour which is used to dominate, intimidate, and really try and control a person. Its main aim is to ensure that a person is no longer independent. Not all coercive control will have physical elements to it. Some of it will be psychological and emotional. It was very clear that there was a sense of possessiveness within the relationship in terms of who she could see, who she could speak to. These are really clear indicators of coercive control, even after the relationship had ended. It's not that you end the relationship and the abuse ends. It continues for weeks, months, years of being attacked by an individual in multiple ways.
Social media was central to Coca's ongoing efforts to control his ex-partner.
I know in this particular case that there was a lot of fake accounts created in order to monitor and keep up to date with particular movements. It's very common and would fall into that sort of stalking-like and monitoring behaviour.
It was clear Orhan was engaged in coercive control. But detectives still needed evidence he was at the crime scene and responsible for Eamonn's murder.
We were confident that we had established a motive. We were confident that we had established that Eamonn Coca had the opportunity to commit the crime. We were confident that we had recovered digital evidence from his phone. He had downloaded a photograph of Eamonn Magee. I would say that he had downloaded that photograph in order to make sure he got the right person. We were having discussions with the prosecution service. We were presenting a case which was circumstantial in nature, but that still fell short. Until the 11th hour, really what the prosecution service required was that definitive bit of evidence. It is the phone call that you always want to have, and when you get that call to say that you have got not only the victim's blood on the jeans, but Eamonn Coca's DNA on the jeans, without any complications in the DNA mix, pure million to one chance.
Having received the conclusive forensic results on the genes, the team finally felt they had enough evidence to present their case to the PPS.
Having had the results come back, I remember speaking to the prosecution service who gave the final green light, and it was the greatest conversation to say to Darren, charge that man with murder.
I charged Eamonn Coca. He is, again, nonplussed, made no reply after caution. Could have been charging him with anything, not the taking of a young man's life.
Darren made his arrest just 72 hours after Eamonn Magee's murder. Assistance from the community was key to the fast progress of the case. But now it seemed that support went only so far.
We were being fed very helpfully and we're very grateful for the information that was coming, but it's very different between knowing what happened and proving what happened. And quite often in murder investigations, we know what happened, but we haven't been able to secure the evidence that is capable of being presented before court in order to convince a jury of somebody's guilt. So whilst it was helpful, nobody was supplying witness statements to the police investigation.
The case relied on evidence from the security guard at Beckett's bar. It helped establish Orhan's movements on the night of the murder, evidence detectives badly needed on the record.
That's one of the people that we felt needed to get a bit of permission to talk to us. He was happy to chat to us, but not formally, not give us written statements.
Without this evidence, the detective's entire case against Orhan was seriously undermined. Again, detectives turned to community leaders for help.
In the immediate years after Sinn Féin's endorsement of policing, it became apparent that the community didn't make relationships with institutions. It made relationships with people. And that's really important to understand. They wanted to see neighbourhood policing, they wanted to engage with the police on the ground, and they wanted to develop a relationship. And that's how you start to develop the rapport between the public and the police itself.
You have to be open and engage with the right people to give the community confidence. Investigation is going well, but if we do not have statements signed by the witnesses, this person is not going to be charged. We had been respectful of the significance of the events that were taking place, how we had interacted with the witnesses, and the legitimate desire by everybody to bring justice to the Magee family. When you add that all together, people felt confident to come forward.
But following John's intervention with the community, he came forward, we had a statement, and he was prepared to go to court and give evidence in relation to that.
The case took 2 years to come to court. During that time, Orhan maintained his innocence, but sacked several of his legal teams. He had last faced trial in March 2017.
My name is Ashley MacDonald and I'm a court reporter primarily covering Belfast Crown Court. The name Eamonn Magee, everybody in Belfast and beyond knows that name because of his dad, the boxer, so I automatically knew that this was going to be a very high-profile case because of who his father was. And then, really, as the story unfolded, it was just horrendous. So on that day, the trial was ready to proceed. The public gallery was packed with Eamonn's friends and family. I was certainly ready to report on a 2 or 3 week trial. The Crown was ready to present its case. The judge was ready to go. There had been 2 or 3 weeks set aside for this very important trial to be heard. And it was quite strange because we were waiting for the jury to be sworn, and then his defence barrister asked the judge if he could have a brief adjournment. Sometimes in a situation like this, a defendant pleads at the last minute. But with this defendant, he hadn't admitted anything in these 2 years. He'd barely spoken about it. And in that brief adjournment for 25, 30 minutes, there was a strange atmosphere in the court. I kept looking at him and he just kept his head down, so I really didn't have a gut instinct at that point, but there was a certain tension. Whenever the barristers came back into the court and the judge came back into the court, there was a bit of a tension in the air, and I did think, oh, is he going to be rearranged here? Is he finally going to admit to what he did? And he did.
I remember him then being took down off the docks and looked at me. Sorry for your loss. And away he walked on. Nodded his head and smiled. Then, as he was walking past Francis, he went like that to him. You're next. He's a foul man.
It may well have been only the second murder that I dealt with where jealousy was the motive. Jealousy is a very sinister trait and is one that one could held in abundance. For somebody to be thinking about murder to act on those thoughts, pre-plan, pre-prepare. He had time to reflect and consider not to do this. Could have backed out of it at any point.
I think in this particular case, the new relationship was certainly a trigger for this individual in terms of their possessiveness, their jealous behaviour, their sense of dominance over a person had certainly aggravated and provoked what was a very violent act. I think that behaviour can be triggered within relationships. If you are, shall we say, behaving yourself within the relationship and doing as the abuser would like you to do and behaving in the way they'd like you to behave. Often when you step out of that, or if you try to move away from the relationship, it can be quite triggering for an abuser. And it means that they may escalate their own behaviours from things like psychological and emotional abuse to maybe more threatening behaviour or even violent physical behaviour.
Orhan Koka must serve a minimum term of 14 years before he can be considered for release.
They were probably glad that they got the guilty plea because this was finally a recognition of what he did. You know, would you really want to see a man deny murdering your son, your brother, for those 3 weeks?
We're the one with the life sentence, not him. Do you know, he's going to get out in a few years. He's going to go back to Turkey and live his life again. We're left with this for the rest of our lives. But then I didn't want it to happen because I honestly think my mummy would have died of a broken heart then.
Although they probably would like to have seen him explain his actions more if he ever would have gone under cross-examination in the dock, what they did was get a confession, which ultimately led to conviction. The fact that he'd adjourned proceedings and delayed proceedings because of his continual sacking of legal teams. So he did play the system and the 14-year minimum sentence was imposed. Ultimately, the judge decides this, but the family accepted the sentence, but I don't think they were particularly happy with it, and I don't think that it reflected the severity of the crime.
The judge, he couldn't look at us for some reason, the judge, because he wanted to give him a heavier sentence, but he couldn't, he just had to go by law. 2 years he had done before he even got the sentence. And there's 6 to do, and we're still left crying every single day.
He's never going to come back. Do you know, that's him now, that's his life. He's gone forever, doesn't have a life. Where Orhan Koka gets to come out of prison in a few years, go back to Turkey and he can start all over.
"14 years seems like nothing compared to the life sentence that Courtney and the Magee family face. Do I feel it's enough? No, I do not. If it had been doubled, would I feel it's enough? Probably not.
That young man's not coming back. That family will be grieving until they go and meet again. All they can do is kiss a photograph and say happy birthday. That's not 14 years. That's a life sentence.
John puts the success of his investigation down to one pivotal decision.
To this day, I suppose 8 years later, I would be convinced that had I not done an about turn on that hill to speak to the counsellor, that I would have lost opportunities in this investigation. This was the first time, I suppose, maybe direct, active engagement that was not tokenism. This was, I need you. You know, I really need you on this occasion. I don't have the answers. I am not going to get this evidence, but you can.
Sometimes people think that when you live in Northern Ireland, you become desensitised to violence because of the conflict and living through the conflict and what that meant to people and families. And I just think that, and something like this happens, and the horrific nature of it and the brutality involved shook me and it shook other people as well.
What done my head in the most, it was like everyone kept saying to me, you gotta be strong. You gotta be strong. You have to, you have to, you have to. I made sure I kept it up here for everyone. But now I think, now I'm only starting to grieve, really. Big time. Like any mother would be, she's heartbroken. She's a ghost. Still is to this day. She's just a frame. She's not the Mary, the mother, the loving, kind person. She's loving, kind, but she's just not the full person that I used to know.
Mary Magee will never forget the last time she saw her son.
Yeah. Just that evening that he had left the house, me and his sister Anya were leaning over the banister talking to him. Me and him had a wee thing from he was no age. You know, that used to be the Barney song, I love you, you love me. And so me and him used to say, me you son, me you mummy, and all that. So and he said upstairs, me you mummy. And then he just went on out to his class.
Beautiful smile, and the shyness of a smile where he tipped his head a wee bit. You couldn't help but like him. I want to remember him as a champion. A champion. And that's him in a nutshell, a champion.
We never stopped talking about him, ever. Cormac, my oldest wee boy, was Eamonn's godson. He talks about him every single day. Eamonn, my middle wee boy, I constantly just tell him who he's named after, and it's just stories, wee things pop in your head every single day and you talk to them. And then Kate, obviously my youngest, he's just a baby, so, but I will drill it into his head.
You just keep thinking, what if? What if he had graduated? What if he had made the boxing? You know, he would have been married, wee family of his own, wee house of his own, car on the road. Just think all these different things. But it's never going to happen now.